Chers collègues, je vous propose...
Dear colleagues, I suggest we resume our work, moving on to the last item on the agenda, which is an exchange of views on the follow-up to the European Parliament Emergency or Urgency Resolution of the 11th of September 2025 on the human rights situation in Rwanda, in particular the case of VICTOIRE INGABIRE. This has been organised in association with the Africa-European Union Parliamentary Assembly. I welcome at my side its President, Mrs. Hilda Vautmans. The human rights situation in Rwanda is currently being examined at the United Nations Human Rights Council as part of the Universal Periodic Review dedicated to that country. The ongoing exchanges shine a light on the recurrent concerns about the human rights situation in the country. This includes the treatment of political opponents, restrictions of civic space and the violations of fundamental freedoms. The conclusions of this review will be presented on the 30th of January and we will very closely follow the recommendations that will be issued. Since the beginning of this mandate, the European Parliament has expressed its concern about the human rights situation in Rwanda. We've called on the Rwandan government to withdraw its troops from the territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and to cease its cooperation with the M23 rebels. We've also called for the immediate suspension of the EU-Rwanda Memorandum of Understanding on critical raw materials, on which the issue of human rights conditionality has expressly been raised. When it comes to the case of VICTOIRE INGABIRE, a member of the Rwandan Democratic Opposition, this is an emblematic example of the human rights situation in Rwanda. VICTOIRE INGABIRE was pre-selected as a candidate for the Sakharov Prize in 2012. In 2010, she had already been imprisoned after an unfair trial before receiving a presidential pardon in September 2018. Her arrest last June has been linked to that of 8 members of Ms. Ingabire's political party. She is an independent journalist who was arrested in October 2021 after attending online meetings in which peaceful strategies to resist authoritarianism were discussed. The arrest of VICTOIRE INGABIRE and members of her party follows acts of political non-violence and peaceful civic mobilisation. It is in response to the seriousness of these facts that the European Parliament adopted an urgency resolution denouncing serious judicial irregularities in the trial of VICTOIRE INGABIRE, calling for her immediate release. More generally, this resolution expresses our concern at the repeated human rights violations in Rwanda targeting the opposition, journalists, civil society and dissidents, and calls for the end to arbitrary arrests and independent investigations into enforced disappearances and unsolved deaths. I would also like to recall that through this resolution, the European Parliament calls on the European Commission to reassess its assistance to Rwanda and urges the EU and its member states to put human rights at the heart of their dialogue with Kigali. Now, these conditions are essential to reaffirm the EU's commitment to the defence of human rights, political freedom and the rule of law in Rwanda. To assess the human rights situation in Rwanda and the case of VICTOIRE INGABIRE, we can welcome several speakers today, including Ms. Ingabire's son, Remy Amahirwa. So thank you so much for being with us today. We'd also like to welcome Lewis Mudge, Director for Central Africa at Human Rights Watch, who will share his organisation's analysis of the human rights situation in Rwanda. And we also have Paolo Berizzi, Head of Division for Central Africa at the EEAS, who will address in particular the EU-Rwanda Human Rights Dialogue, which was held in mid-January. But before that, I will give the floor to Hilda for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Chair. Thank you very much for putting this on the agenda. Dear colleagues, and especially dear Remy, thank you for being here with us. We are here today once again extremely saddened and disappointed by the human rights situation in Rwanda. Chair, very much I welcome your position and to put this on the agenda. I very much appreciate it. Since our September urgency resolution, unfortunately, not much has changed. VICTOIRE INGABIRE remains imprisoned. Her health continues to deteriorate given the ill treatment she is subject to. Overall, the situation remains dire for all opposition and journalists. The fourth Universal Periodic Review for Rwanda, which has just been concluded, demonstrates that much remains to be done to address violations of international human rights obligations in Rwanda, particularly in terms of fundamental freedoms, despite the formal commitments by the authorities. This is part of a broader issue, the complete impunity and lack of accountability of the Rwandan government, from harassment, arbitrary arrest and imprisonment of opposition members, journalists and civil society, as well as unforced disappearances, to the illegal occupation of part of the territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo and exploiting its mineral resources, including through support to the M23 rebel group. They simply do not care. And I must say the violence continued to happen despite the peace agreement. As European Union, we need to be doing more to address these violations. We cannot continue to pour millions of taxpayers' funding into Rwanda, notably for critical raw materials, when we know the provenance of at least a part of the mineral resources. Instead, we need to step up our support to governments and accountability, democratic participation and civil society, rule of law, human rights and ending violence against women and girls. We need to continue to pass this message. Enough is enough, colleagues. But for this, we need a coherent approach with the EEAS and with the Commission and with the EU Special Representative. Together, we must call, and I repeat it, and you know when I start asking it, I will repeat it week after week, month after month, till Remy, you have your mother back in your hands. We want the immediately and unconditional release of your mother, of Victoire Ingabire and other opposition figures. We must also ensure that EU cooperation with Rwanda is consistent with the promotion of human rights and democracy. So for this, colleagues, thank you for the support and thank you for the battle we will do together. We will get your mama back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilda. I can now give the floor to Remy Amahirwa for being here. I'd like to thank you for being here. You have 7 minutes.
First of all, I want to thank you, Hilda, for those words. It really is encouraging. And I want to thank the Human Rights Committee here of the EU for listening to my story, or my family's story. A short background. I come from a family of 5, together with my 2 siblings, and then my father and mother. When my mother went back to Rwanda around 16 years ago, back in 2010, she planned to come and visit us every 3 months. But unfortunately, by her first try to leave the country, she was stopped and halted at the airport, was not allowed to leave, and then our family nightmare began. In October of 2010, she got arrested, and it was a long trial that kind of looks like this right now. So I'm getting flashbacks and worries that something similar might happen. She was called a terrorist, trying to overthrow the Rwandan society and government, and eventually she was given 15 years in prison. It was very difficult those times. And after we went in appeal, so I thought, oh, well, what? Probably only can get less. She got more years in prison. So we lost our hope in the Rwandese judicial system. When she was released on a presidential pardon, very suddenly, in 2018, we got a little bit hope back from, that Rwanda was on the right path. But she was not allowed to leave the country, even though she was released from prison, her prison cell. So eventually the country became her prison cell. But it was better than those 4 walls. We were able to call with her again through WhatsApp, show her pictures of our lives and see of hers. And after getting getting enough courage, my sister decided to make the trip to Rwanda and visit my mom for the first time. She went there with her 2 young boys during COVID. Afterwards, my little brother went, and last year I went also with my wife and my 2 small children. This all gave us good hope again that Rwanda was on the right track. But while I was in Rwanda last year, in February, March, my mother warned me, well, I have a probation that, after her release in 2018 of 7 years before I will get my rights back, and including her passport, before I can leave the country. That should have been last year in October. So I'm not really sure if they're going to do it, if they're going to give me those rights back. And lo and behold, the 19th of June, she was arrested again. Strangely enough was that she was arrested after she came from a court hearing testifying against her other colleagues who are already in prison since 2018. The judge did not find my mother should be allowed to go back home or be innocent enough. So the police followed her back to her house, arrested her there that night, and took her to prison. She has been locked in prison without us having any contact with her. No phone calls whatsoever have been granted. Besides that, she was put in prison with a woman who was convicted of murder, even though she just started to stand trial. So we were hopeless. The same hell, the same nightmare that happened in 2010 is going to happen again, and this time it's coming with vengeance. Because I believe that when she was released in 2018, it was because of international pressure. Just shortly before her miraculous presidential pardon release, the African Court on Human and People Rights gave my mother, said that my mother was in her right, that her rights were violated in Rwanda and that she should not be imprisoned by the non-violent political activities that she did. And I believe that actually that worked, that the African Court, where Rwanda was a member of, that they said those things. Shortly after my mother's hearing there, the African Court, Rwanda withdrew, and a little bit later, the president released her. So international pressure works. So instead of trusting this time on the judicial system of Rwanda, I want to put my faith and trust in you, the EU Parliament, and the rest of the world, international community, to put pressure on Rwanda again, as you did back in 2017-18. But last week, I was in the UPR on Rwanda in Geneva. And while I was sitting there as a guest, listening how country after country after country asked Rwanda about their issue with arbitrary detention and forceful disappearance, I saw the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Rwanda just ignoring those questions of those countries. I was sitting in a similar room like this, and after a while, it just it was really hard to keep my tears in, and I just wanted to shout out to him, answer their question. But I composed myself, went after the meeting directly to the stage, and I went up to the Minister of Justice of Rwanda. I shook his hand and I said, Minister, could you please answer me the question, the issue about arbitrary detention in the case of my mother, Victoire? And I can tell you that he was quite held back that I was the son of Victoire, actually then the same room and meeting as him asking that question. And I could say that he pointed out that, oh, you know what, last week the Supreme Court of Rwanda said that they allow your mother to look into the issue about the legality of her arrest. So I have good faith in the fairness of her trial. But I told him that it is hard for us as family to share that same optimism in Rwanda's system. So I ask you again to hold Rwanda accountable this time, and also the Minister of Justice. Thank you.
Merci pour...
Thank you so much for your account, and thank you for sticking to the time. Mr. Lewis Mudge, who is online. You have 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Tout le monde en français, mais je vais passer à mon langue maternelle.
I'll be moving into English, my mother tongue.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the EU Parliament on the human rights situation in Rwanda, in particular on the chronic lack of judicial independence that has shaped political repression in the country. The Rwandan judiciary lacks autonomy from the executive, and this pursuit of abusive prosecutions against one of Rwanda's most prominent opposition leaders, Victoire Ingabire, is illustrative of a broader pattern in which the judiciary has been used as a tool of repression rather than an independent arbiter of justice. Ingabire's current detention, as well as her past prosecution, conviction, and imprisonment on politically motivated charges, demonstrate how Rwanda's courts have been leveraged to silence dissent and constrain political pluralism. Ingabire's 2010 return to Rwanda sparked a harsh response from authorities. Rather than allowing a legitimate political contest back then, the Rwandan government pursued a campaign to criminalize Ingabire's political activity. She was arrested, as we've already heard. She was arrested first in 2010 and charged with offenses including genocide ideology, undermining government institutions, and collaborating with terrorist organizations. Many of these charges were based on political statements or associations, raising serious concerns for us at the time about these vaguely defined crimes of speech and associations that were used to repress the opposition. At the time, I was in Rwanda. I was still allowed to go to the country. Human Rights Watch and other human rights groups documented how key evidence depended on hearsay and was really no more than Ingabire's lawful political expression. The trial back then was marked by serious irregularities, and the eventual appeals process, which we've heard actually added more time on, it did not meaningfully address real procedural concerns. I myself, just as a personal note, visited Ingabire in prison on numerous occasions before I was kicked out indefinitely of Rwanda in early 2018. After Ingabire's pardon in 2018, she was not allowed to leave the country, as we've heard, and organizations, including my own at Human Rights Watch, began to document an increase in pressure on her supporters just after her release. For example, there's the case of Boniface Twagirimana. He was a former leader of Ingabire's original party, the FDU in Kingi. He disappeared from his prison cell in circumstances that just today continue to indicate that he is the victim of an enforced disappearance. His whereabouts continue to be unknown. In 2019, 3 of her party members were found dead or went missing in suspicious circumstances. In October 2021, as we've heard, 7 members of her unregistered party were arrested in the run-up to an event intended to discuss political repression in Rwanda. I think it bears repeating. A journalist, Theoneste Nsengimana, who planned to report on the event, was also detained and tried with them. They were held in pretrial detention for 3 years until a trial finally started in October 2024, notwithstanding, and I think this is very important, that in March 2024, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention deemed their detention arbitrary and to violate multiple rights and called for their release and compensation. The prosecution has tied their alleged wrongdoing to the attendance of a nonviolent civic training and the reading of a book on political resistance. The trial on charges such as conspiracy, incitement, and informing a criminal group have been ongoing for over a year, and the defendants currently face decades in prison. In June 2025, Rwandan authorities arrested Ingabire again at her home in Kigali. She's been accused of inciting public disorder, forming a political and criminal organization, and related offenses tied to her communications with those members. The trial against Ingabire and her party members illustrate patterns of arrest, prolonged pretrial detention, and prosecution on expansive charges which underscore how the judiciary is utilized as a mechanism for silencing dissent and deterring political participation. The repression seen in the persecution of INGABIRE reflects a broader pattern of shrinking civic space in Rwanda. Opposition parties are subject to administrative harassment and legal restrictions. Civil society organizations face onerous registration requirements and surveillance, and journalists and activists have been arrested, detained, forced into exile, or died under very mysterious circumstances. The key institution meant to provide oversight and defend civic space is the National Human Rights Commission, but this commission routinely endorses official positions rather than providing independent, critical assessments of rights violations. The Human Rights Commission's repeated failure to investigate credible allegations of judicial abuse or politically motivated prosecution raises urgent questions about its independence and its effectiveness. I urge this body to see the National Human Rights Commission for what it is. It is a body that legitimizes political and government narratives rather than one that provides meaningful protection for fundamental rights. I also would like to reiterate what Ms. Vautmans said earlier about the DRC. It's important that we're talking about internal aspects of Rwanda because these structural weaknesses have consequences beyond Rwanda. A judiciary that lacks independence is ill-equipped to constrain executive decision-making on issues such as military engagement or cross-border operations. We are seeing Rwanda's involvement in the eastern DRC, where Rwandan forces and its allied M23 militias are continually, right now in real time, committing abuses. And this has unfolded with no legal accountability and no internal judicial scrutiny. Without an independent judiciary, there is no internal legal restraint on policies that may fuel this regional instability. These issues are indeed connected. I want to end, and I apologize for going a minute over, but I want to end with the EU's role in supporting governance, justice reform, and regional stability in the region. The EU should ensure its engagement strengthens rather than inadvertently legitimizes institutions that undermine human rights. Unfortunately, the EU Commission's €19.5 million Justice and Accountability Program that was launched 2 years ago with Rwanda's Ministry of Justice is, according to its own action document, wrongly based on the premises that Rwanda's judiciary is independent and that the National Human Rights Commission effectively pursues its mandate, and that the Rwanda Investigative Bureau, widely known by Rwandans and observers such as Human Rights Watch, as an arm of repression, is actually a relevant stakeholder for an EU-funded program. I'm happy to talk about this later, but I can't reiterate enough those points about the National Human Rights Commission and the Rwanda Investigative Bureau, who the EU is aligned with. Programs designed to support justice and accountability should instead, in our opinion, be aligned with internationally recognized human rights standards. We urge the EU Commission to conduct independent assessments of judicial practice and space for political opposition as prerequisites for deeper cooperation. If such programs lack adequate human rights safeguards, the European Union should recalibrate them or suspend funding pending reform. Finally, the EU should make human rights and rule of law a central pillar of bilateral dialogues for public diplomacy with Rwanda. It should use parliamentary and high-level diplomatic channels to communicate clear expectations on reform, and it should publicly and financially support independent civil society actors that monitor trials, document human rights abuses, and advocate for positive changes. I will stop there. There's plenty to talk about, but I again thank the Commission for taking this urgent issue up.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm now going to give the floor to Mr. Berizzi for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to express my sympathy for the family of Victoire Ingabire, and I commend your tireless effort advocating for the release of your mother and also today's very clear presentation you made. I also thank you, the speakers who preceded me, the representative from Human Rights Watch and the chair, the co-chair, Mrs. Vautmans. And finally, I want to thank the European Parliament for organizing this exchange of views and following this case so closely, not only since her arrest in June, but also during her previous imprisonment. I would like to start by saying that we are closely monitoring the developments related to Mrs. Ingabire's case, both from here in Brussels and in Kigali. Since she was arrested in June, the European External Action Service, the EU delegation in Kigali, but also the EU Special Representative on Human Rights, have been following the case with keen interest and proactively. This case is important as it relates to Rwanda's obligation under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. And as state party of ICCPR since 1975, Rwanda is committed to uphold fundamental rights such as the right to fair trial and freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. But not only do we monitor the case, but we also continue to call on Rwanda to full respect due process and rule of law. This includes ensuring us access to legal counsel, the presumption of innocence, and the right to a fair trial for Victoire Ingabire. In coordination with the EU member states, the EU delegation in Kigali has raised the case with the Rwandan authorities repeatedly and in various settings over the past months. Most recently, our EU ambassador, together with EU member states, ambassadors have discussed the case at length with Rwanda's Minister of Justice during the EU-Rwanda dialogue on justice and human rights. It was a couple of weeks ago, on 15th of January, just a day before the Supreme Court's ruling allowing the constitutionality challenge, and just a week before Rwanda Universal Periodical Review. And the EU and member states reiterated important concerns on human rights, fundamental freedom, due process rights, among others. The case was also discussed a couple of months earlier during the more general EU-Rwanda Partnership Dialogue, 28 November, where we called Rwanda to ensure full transparency, due process, full respect for international human rights, direct contact between Mrs. Ingabire and her family, including by phone. We, of course, EU delegation, member states, we follow the court proceeding, so we were present closely. We have observed sessions on the court hearings, and the Netherlands have been able to visit Mrs. Ingabire in prison and attend the court hearing on 16th of January that I referred to. And the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, Mrs. Ollongren, is in contact with Mr. Amahirwa and has used their platform to call for direct contact for the family as well as her release. We appreciate that Rwanda is willing to engage in an open dialogue with us. We also took note on the latest development on the 16th of January, the decision of the Supreme Court, which is, of course, a positive development, and we hope that this is a sign of respect of the rule of law and judicial independence in Rwanda. We hope that this is the meaning of this decision. We will continue to closely monitor on the next steps of the proceedings ahead of the final decision on the constitutionality, which is expected in March, so in a couple of months. As concerns the Universal Periodical Review within the UN Human Rights Council, it took place on the 21st of January. The report is expected on the 30th of January, just Friday this week. And the country is now in the process of selecting recommendations to implement. This is the way that the UPR works. But in this regard, strengthening safeguards against arbitrary detention and prosecution of political opponents is key in selecting the priorities. The EU has further encouraged Rwanda to seize this opportunity to focus not only on the commitments delivered, but also on the persisting challenges, including civil space, freedom of expression and association, media freedom, detention condition. And by the way, we are also following closely the 2024 law about NGOs because we had concerns about the operational autonomy of civil society organizations in Rwanda. As was recalled, we allocate funding through instruments like the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, directly supporting human rights defenders, civil society, and initiatives that promote fundamental freedoms. The EU maintains continuous oversight of all projects and the broader situation in Rwanda through regular monitoring and reporting mechanisms. I also want to reassure you that the European External Action Service and our delegation will continue to closely monitoring not only this case but the whole situation of human rights in Rwanda, and will not shy away from bringing the difficult issues to our discussions, as we haven't done so far. The case of Victoire Ingabire is at the forefront of our exchanges with the authorities and will continue to be so. So we sincerely hope that eventually justice will prevail. Thank you.
Merci à vous. On va passer.
Thank you. We're now going to have our exchange with the deputies, Mr. Assis, the Socialist.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je parlerai en langue portugais.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll speak in my language. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our speakers. Very excellent quality, and they are showing us the serious situation in Rwanda and that is taking place in various parts of the world, as we've also seen, where we see a case that is a clear violation of fundamental rights for an individual, because that individual is fighting for human rights and democracy, someone who was hoping to contribute to the country, to assist the country to reestablish itself following a very tragic period in the life of Rwanda. And of course, we send our warmest wishes to the son. This is a very serious case, a very, very serious case, and where we can see that there's a regular practice in Rwanda. In the European Parliament, we've had several resolutions. We recently adopted a new one. We don't have any news that there's part on the side of Rwanda to shift substantially their behavior. The European Parliament, in face of this, has to be very clear. First and foremost, we have to stand in solidarity with those who are being detained arbitrarily. And we need to show this solidarity with these individuals and the organizations that we support. Also, vis-à-vis Rwanda, we have to state that situations like this could have negative consequences in our relations. We have various means to act, and obviously no blackmail with another country. And of course, it's not an issue that we don't want to raise in an undelicate way. We don't want to be harder with countries in Africa. We are taking strong positions even within Europe and other countries in Europe. And the situations that we have seen in Africa, we've seen that there's much lacking still and traumatic situations, but what we can see here and now, what we're talking about is the universal quality of human rights. We have fought for that, and the need to make sure that those fundamental human rights are respected in this country. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Assis. Katharina Vera.
Thank you, Mr. Assis. Katarina Vera for the Greens.
Thank you very much, Chair. Maybe starting off where Mr. Assis left, we will be critical of states who violate human rights regardless of which those states are, and without fear and without difference. At least that would be my position at all points and at all moments, and that goes to Rwanda as it could go to the United States or whoever it is that is abusing human rights. In any case, I'd like to express my appreciation for this follow-up meeting, which is extremely important after our urgency resolution, and thank all of our speakers, but particularly Remy, for sharing with us so directly your life story, the story of your mother, for joining us today and giving a first-hand testimony, which is always very touching and very different. So thank you for being here. And as my colleagues have, I'd like to underline that Victoire Ingabire UMUHOZA is a courageous opposition leader, and she was imprisoned not for any criminal activity, but rather for challenging the status quo, for being politically active, and for wanting to fulfill her role as a politician. And therefore, I join my colleagues in the call for the immediate and unconditional release of her release, and as well as other opposition figures who are in jail facing politically motivated charges. The case of INGABIRE is not isolated, but unfortunately is part of a broader pattern of pressure on opposition figures, on critics, and in independent voices in Rwanda. And so we see that not only political opposition, but also civil society and independent media are facing severe restrictions, alongside reports of threats, intimidation, arbitrary detention, and other serious human rights violations, including possibly even alleged killings and enforced disappearances, which we should take very seriously. So cooperation with Rwanda from the side of the EU must align with the promotion of human rights, democracy, and fair trial standards. And this is part of our credibility as the EU to make sure that our partners, that our our friends in other countries are adhering to human rights and to respect those. I would also like to thank, finally, the EEAS for both your work that you do here, but also that you say the delegation is doing in Rwanda. And thank you for putting this on top of the agenda, and I hope you can continue to keep up the pressure until we finally see the release of INGABIRE and that she's back home with her family where she belongs. Thank you very much.
Chers collègues, Madame Hassan pour le groupe The Left.
Ms. Hassan for the left, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your comments and your account, which is always very important for the work of these kinds of committees. I've got a question which could lead to different reactions, but a question for Human Rights Watch. The state of play on human rights violations has been documented by various organizations. I was wondering about possible threats or attempts at dissuasion which could affect the work of international organizations that are trying to document this and collect witness accounts when it comes to human rights violations. So I was wondering about the work of these organizations. What kind of obstacles are they facing when it comes to comprehensive documentation of these violations? It would also be great to have an exchange on the different possible approaches we could have to go beyond the urgency regulation. We had a pretty good mandate when it comes to the substance, but it's insufficient given the current situation and what's going on when it comes to human rights and to what extent we need to defend them. So it would be great to look at that instrument, and this is really a question for all MEPs who are involved. What more could we do? What kind of instruments could we set up when it comes to... Well, we negotiated a text that was fairly satisfactory, but what could we do apart from that?
Merci. Chers collègues.
Thank you. We've heard from all the coordinators. Would anyone else want to take the floor? Nacho? No? Ms. Ferrigotti, you wanted to take the floor? But before you take the floor, you are not a member of the Droit Committee, you're not a member of the delegation. However, there is precedent for this. I want to give you the floor because your group has not commented on the matter. But it would be great if we could receive your request a bit beforehand next time. Thank you.
Sí, pido disculpas. Yo soy miembro de la comisión.
I apologise. I'm a member of the Development Committee, and I've got a link with Victoire because I'm from Mallorca, and she's actually got a strong relationship with Mallorca, her children, her husband, and I've had a historical relationship with her. And for me, this means talking about human rights, and whenever there's a debate about this in the Parliament, I want to be here. In 2010, she was arrested. 2012, 8 years in prison, that's turned into 15. completely unfairly. She wrote a wonderful book, which I would recommend to all of you. In a FEM mission, I was on that mission for the FAM committee, and we requested a visit with Victoire. It wasn't possible. The MEPs were not able to go to the prison. In fact, they took all of our mobile phones off of us, and it was a really difficult moment. In 2025, she has been detained again. She was under house arrest, and we spoke to her during that time. And of course, the trial was full of injustice. We have approved a number of resolutions in the Parliament, including last week in Strasbourg, but I think that we can do more. I believe that international pressure is something that the President of Rwanda must feel. He must feel that we are on top of this issue, because at least if we do that, if we exert our pressure, if we adopt resolutions, if we hold debates, then he will know that we are awaiting the release of Victoire. And this is so unfair. I was one of the signatories for the Sakharov Prize in 2012. And I think this is a long story of injustice and a real curtailment of human rights. So you can count on me to continue supporting Victoire, her party, and defending human rights. Thank you.
Nacho.
Sí, gracias. Puesto que Rosa ha hablado en español, yo...
Thank you very much. Since Rosa spoke in Spanish, I will do the same. So, first of all, I'd like to send my solidarity to the family and the activists that have worked very hard on this file for many years. I am not a specialist in Africa, but I am in silence. I'm an expert in silence, and for some 4 years... And I'd like to just build on something that was said by Francisco Assis and Rosa. It is beginning to really become genetically accepted that human rights is something that comes from the European Parliament, and the executive is doing something completely different. The silence from the executive bothers me. So this distinction, this bipolarness, just going back to what Francisco said, it's not true that we are harder on countries from Africa. And this accusation is an accusation of colonization or neo-colonization or a paternalistic approach. No. I think what is starting to become a paternalistic trace is silence. Silence about human rights and the situation thereof in Africa. And therefore, do you have your raw materials? Do you allow to your migrants to be sent back for repression, for prison, or for unjust sentences? This is neocolonialism. What is happening in Rwanda? The games between NGOs and opposition parties, the raw materials, and then in exchange, if you give them to us, I'm not going to ask you any hard questions. That is neo-colonization, neo-colonialism, and that is what we need to speak out about here in the European Parliament. Thank you.
OK. Alors, avant de donner la parole à nous...
OK. So before we hand over to our guests, I've got a somewhat specific question. So apart from diplomacy, speeches, intentions, is there any way of taking concrete action that would have an impact on the authorities by the European Union? As Mr. Mons mentioned, there's a plan for support for justice and the resolution. What plans do we have, apart from what Ms. INGABIRE is going through? Is there any way we could suspend, at least suspend the program, at least symbolically? No, I'm going to go for the same orders we just did. Remy, maybe you could start with 3 minutes. Thank you.
Well, I believe that that is you who has to school me in what the possibilities are. But for me, I want my mother as home as fast as possible, by any means as possible. If that will be through diplomacy, if that will be through sanctions, whatever is on the table, I will go for it. I do, just like my fellow speaker said, am now looking at the Minister of Justice of Rwanda after his remarks that the Rwandese Supreme Court decision was, in fairness and in favor of my mom, to see where this goes. Who knows, maybe Rwanda has an idea of themselves that, without taking too much reputational damage in that sense, that they can also restore their own honor by actually giving my mother a fair trial for the first. I would like to see that happen. I think that will be the best possibility of all outcomes, a win-win, as to say. But I'm afraid that that might not happen without also the additional pressure. So I would say if sanctions is something that can happen, especially looking at the atrocities that are happening in Congo, who are quote-unquote stopped now by Trump, but I think those atrocities must be also held in the same dialogue, because the parliament in Rwanda seems to be just echoing what the government of Rwanda wants. I remember in September, after the EU Parliament sent out this resolution in support of my mother, the Minister of Foreign Affairs went on Twitter, X, and called it neocolonialism, as you just said. And not so many days later, also, the Rwandese Parliament kind of echoed the same in their own counter-resolution. So I think that if there's no rule of law in Rwanda, a real democracy with a real parliament that comes up with the voice of its people, then the Rwandese society, civilization will never complain about their sons being sent over the border to, to die or to kill. And I think that is something that people must really understand. What my mother is fighting for will impact the whole Great Lakes region and the peace that is lacking there. So if my mother and other political prisoners will be freed, that will be the start of actually true and lasting peace and prosperity in the Great Lakes region. For then you have a court that is not always doing the bidding of the executive, and likewise with the parliament. So I think that that is something we need to understand, that we're fighting for, not just for the release of my mother, but the release of the whole Great Lakes region.
Monsieur Moch, en ligne.
Mr. Mudge, online. 3 minutes. Please do stick to the time. I'm sure you've got a lot to tell us.
Listen, Remy, I completely sympathize with Remy's position. He wants his mother released. But to his point, this needs to be pushed beyond just one person. Victoire Ingabire's case is emblematic of the judicial system in Rwanda. As people have been speaking, I've been reading over the EU's document to facilitate engagement with the Ministry of Justice. And I want to reiterate what I was saying earlier. This is a substantial amount of money from the European Union that's going to support the National Human Rights Commission, the Justice Ministry, and the Rwanda Investigative Bureau, the RIB, the RIB, as they call it in Rwanda. These are not independent structures, full stop. And so it's really, suspension absolutely should be considered vis-a-vis this program. This is the opinion of Human Rights Watch. The document is here. I mean, it's publicly available. There are certain tenets of the document which simply are not applicable. The National Human Rights Commission doesn't do its core work. The Rwandan judiciary, whilst it is, in terms of capacity, very, very professional. You're talking to someone who's dealt on many levels with the Rwandan judiciary. The capacity's there. It simply doesn't have the independence. I mean, that's just, for us at HRW, that's a matter of fact. I wanted to just I have another minute left, and I just wanted to just address a question that was asked to me earlier by I'm sorry, I think it was Ms. Hassan in the panel, with regards to threats to human rights organizations. I think it's just worth noting, we have a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch who works in the Great Lakes region. She was the fourth of Human Rights Watch staff that's been kicked out of Rwanda. Human Rights Watch worked well before the genocide in 1994 in Rwanda. Since 2010 to 2025, we've had 4 staff members declared persona non grata, including myself. This is a very, very difficult environment for human rights defenders to work in. We're international. We're protected by the grace of our passports. Those dangers and risks are magnified hundreds and hundreds of times over for Rwandese and Rwandan human rights defenders who are working on the ground. Many of them are working in clandestine circumstances, and many do so at great risks. I'm happy to elaborate further on that, but for the time being, I will yield the floor.
Bravo. Vous avez respecté votre parole.
Well done. That was bang on time. Go ahead, please.
No. Okay. I don't see the chrono starting, so I'm free.
There it is.
Okay. First of all, I want to point out. I want to thank all the intervention which I heard, which are very, very constructive and helpful. On the issue of leverages that Mrs. Hassan raised, and on the question raised by the chair, Mr. Saturi, in particular on the Justice and Accountability Program, which it's decided by the European Commission, I think it's much a matter of engaging or disengaging, and we believe that continued EU engagement in initiative like this program allows the EU to sustain the dialogue with Rwanda and address challenges and weaknesses of the Rwanda justice sectors that otherwise we would not have the opportunity to debate and discuss with them. This program, 19 million, is a key initiative designed to enhance justice, human rights, accountability, but it's not only to improve the Rwanda system. It has a component that I'm sure you don't want to suspend, which is support to victims, detainees, vulnerable groups, helping them access legal aid, improving detention conditions and rehabilitation services. So there is definitely, it's a comprehensive program and that's the reason why we are in favor of continuing. It also supports reform and ensure timely and quality justice, compliance with human rights obligation, etc., etc. So the opinion here is that we would like to keep engaging and take also the positive side of this program. On the other points raised, I would limit myself to say that Rwanda, like almost any country of the world, is not insensible to international pressure. What we are doing by continuing to raise this issue in our talks, in our dialogues, and what the European Parliament is doing through the resolution of September and this hearing today is absolutely, in my view, the right thing to do, to put the theme of Mrs. Ingabire detention on the table and to require always an answer from the Rwandese counterparts. So we are putting the pressure, and we will continue to put the pressure until we get satisfactory, of course, replies, and hopefully the liberation of Mrs. Ingabire. So trust us, we are doing everything we can, but we are not giving up on this issue, which is fundamental for us.
Hilda, un petit mot de conclusion.
Hilda. Your conclusion.
Also human rights, for also the Commission, especially Remy, and thank you, Chair, because I think this exchange of views is very useful, because I think if you want to get Victoire free, we have to keep up the pressure. And like many of you also said, it's not only about Victoire. For you, it's only about your mother, but for us, it goes a little bit beyond. But we can use the others to help your mother also. So for me, we have to keep up the pressure. We have to keep asking for the release. I'm really reflecting, and I will talk to the president of this committee also. We have to think of a mechanism that when we vote resolutions, that we can keep up to put the pressure. Because otherwise the resolution is voted and there it is. Normally we should ask maybe the Parliament every 6 months to put a debate on the agenda. Where are we? What steps have been done? When can we do more? What pressure can we put higher? Like with Russia, we are on the 19th sanction packet. Maybe we could reflect to get people free of like, hoe zeg je dan, ladder. Step-by-step sanctions, to keep them up. And then maybe there is an opportunity, colleagues, because the end of this month, there is on the Council, the meeting on the Great Lakes. I'm pushing, and I see the coordinators of AFET tomorrow. I really hope we can put on the agenda of the plenary in February a debate on the conclusions of the Council on the Great Lakes, with resolution. Because I think we need to do it. We need to focus on the situation in the DRC, the role of Rwanda, the people who are in prison there, and that's an excellent moment. So if you all can help me with your groups to put the debate on the Great Lakes region in February on the agenda, and then we have the right moment to push forward and look for the necessary sanctions and pressure. But thanks for the support and courage.
Merci beaucoup pour tes mots, Hilda.
Thank you very much. As we say in good French, sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Well, we as a committee have the power to follow up on resolutions, and I say that for information. Every 6 months, we share within the coordinators and the droit committee all of the follow-up on resolutions to update the agenda, and you know that you need a majority in a coordinators meeting to get that through. And in fact, we will be doing that today in our coordinators meeting, and it is within that context that we also brought in the delegation so that we can get a little bit more clout behind the work that we're doing here, also with the public. And we will come back to that. And within the context of EU-Rwanda relations, because there are other resolutions that have been passed on that subject too, and we hope that we will be able to take tangible measures to show that this is being moved forward. Now, thank you to one and all. The meeting stands adjourned with just a few minutes' time in the interim before the coordinators' meeting starts. Thank you.